Due to the difficulties in the wild and the responsibilities placed upon Paul, plus the aging effect of his beard, Justin thought of his son as an older man. The shearing shattered that image. The boy no longer appeared as the tough and dependable man Justin relied upon and survived with. Only in Paul's eyes could one see that he had carried heavy loads, both physical and mental. Justin studied his son with pride, and he opened his mouth to say something. He thought of Paul's hand. Justin's stomach knotted. He laid back on the cot and stared at the solid rock above his head. He could hear the clip of the scissors and the idle chatter of the young man and the woman, but the sound, like the sound of a fast-moving train, vanished. This craggy, exotic place, flickering in red and smeared with steam, unnerves me. A woman cuts the hair of a one-handed man. Moments pass, and he hears what sounds like the hum of an electric motor. I remember the taste of a boy's blood. He rolled to his side, his mouth filled with saliva. I smell mad dogs and see a beautiful woman. Clammy bumps peppered his skin. I miss David, and I hear Michelle's birth. Justin forced a long, deep breath. The oxygen, infiltrating his blood, seeped into his brain. Like the rush of a narcotic, the element faded his bizarre thoughts. Justin sat up with a feeling that he had dropped from the sky. He turned to Paul. A strip of rawhide bound Paul's shortened hair and hung between his shoulder blades. His lower face, pale after the shave, highlighted his plump lips and square jaw. Paul's angular nose seemed smaller and his smile broader. He glowed with youth, confidence, and genuine joy. When shown a mirror, he rubbed his face over and over. Still smiling, Paul jumped from the chair and ran to his father. "You're next! You're next!" He pulled his father to his feet and over to Oceana's chair. Justin sat down. "The beard comes off. Take half the hair." Paul stayed on his feet, constantly walking around his father, making faces with each clip of the scissors or stroke of the razor. More and more of Justin appeared. "Dad, I don't remember what you looked like." He looked into Justin's eyes. "Really, I don't remember." Lean, rugged features materialized. A firm, square jaw, full lips, and a bit of a smile when relaxed. Paul delighted with the result and held the mirror to allow Justin's inspection. "What do you think of that?" Justin smiled, almost embarrassed with the feel and look of his nakedness. For a few moments he studied the image. "It's recognizable, but older." He rubbed his face one more time. "I like it." A broad smile erupted into loud laughter. Buciak returned with clothing for the men. Oceana strolled past him without a word. Paul yelled after her. "Thanks, Oceana." Justin shouted the same. She turned directly in front of Buciak. "Oh, you're very welcome, and I must say that you're both very beautiful men." She spun back and sort of whirled around Buciak to get to the exit. Buciak followed her with his eyes all the way out the door. He turned to the men. "I gather her work was satisfactory?" Paul and Justin expelled compliments at the same time and at rapid speed. Buciak put his hand up to stop the barrage. Yes, of course." He gave them buckskin trousers, very light in weight and extremely comfortable. Then he handed them a pullover shirt of white linen, wide at the neck, with puffy sleeves and a broad collar. When the men were dressed, they looked most attractive. Nicole, Shemaine, and Michelle enjoyed a similar treatment, the difference a massage with perfumed oils. They too wore buckskin trousers and the same type of pullover shirts, but with a choice of several pastel colors. Nicole's long blue-black hair, after shampooing, trimming, and brushing, shone with the luster of polished onyx. It hung to the small of her back, its fullness spreading across her shoulders to frame her tanned face. With gem-like blue eyes and full lips, now reddened with fruit dye, her beauty swam in mysticism. Only the scars on the left side of her face distracted from her stunning appearance. She chose a pale blue blouse that draped over her trousers with a dark sash tied at the waist. Michelle's once brown hair, now bleached to gold by the sun, fluffed in fullness with brushing and softened her narrow face. Young and strong, the grooming brought forth her womanly self. Her eyes sparkled and her cheeks blushed with the excitement of socializing ahead. She thinking of dance and a chance of romance. Her ruby lips bloomed in a constant, irresistible smile. A deep red blouse complemented the luster of her hair. Chimène chose to twine her hair into a single braid. Its blackness shimmered in the light of the torches. The pulled-back style emphasized her high cheekbones and dark eyes. With highlighted lips, her youthful beauty was a movement away from innocence. She smirked at her deformed arm, but found confidence in the fullness of her breasts, which strained against the confinement of her blouse. Her beauty was sharp, exotic, and cat-like. She wore a pale green blouse. The men proceeded back through the passageways toward the main hall. They hushed to the first sounds of music, deep tones reverberating through the corridors. Justin hesitated a moment. Music. Oh, it's been a long time. The sounds were produced by true artists on finely tuned instruments. With each advancing step, higher notes took form, and the fullness of the music blossomed. The men's hearts throbbed to the bass, their skin tingled to the treble. When near the great hall, the low light of the chambers ceased with one turn in the corridor. The brightness of a day near end, heavy and blue, combined with cool air, sparked the energy of the men, and their nostrils flared at the flowery scent of candles. 11 more steps, and the trio entered the huge main chamber. There, close to 20 musicians, situated outside the central blue circle, played the classics as people completed the last preparations for the celebration. Others danced to a waltz. Placed around the circle at the 4 compass points were tables of food and drink. There were varieties of fish prepared in different ways, and platters of crab and cracked shells, fruit, vegetables, honey, and venison. To the absolute delight of the men, there were assortments of carbohydrates, potatoes, bread, and even pasta, large clay pots brimmed with fruit wine and herb tea. Buciac turned to the men. Mingle freely and, of course, help yourselves to the food and drink. Later, the committee members will again welcome you to our abode and request you stay on permanently. Justin smiled. Thanks for the escort, Buciac. One other thing. He put a hand on Buciac's shoulder. Where are the women of our party? Oh, of course. Excuse me. Where is my head at? He pointed to the far side of the circle. They'll enter through that opening. With that, Buciac smiled and left them on their own. Justin and Paul walked to one of the tables. Paul, look at the food. Paul swallowed. Holy cow. I wasn't expecting this. That's spaghetti over there. And sausage. Justin turned to the other end of the table. Look at that seafood. Oh, I'm going to start there. He headed that way. Paul walked with him. I smell Mexican. This is incredible. I'm afraid to start. Justin picked up an oyster on the half-shell. I wonder if they have liverwurst. Dad, you and your liverwurst. He chomped down on fried fish and pointed again. There's more tables over there. The vast size of the cavern had allowed the stockpiling of many foods. With the smattering of ethnic groups, celebrations at New Atlantis were gastronomical treats, considering the times. "20 minutes later, Paul swallowed half-chewed food and nudged Justin with his elbow. Justin's eyes darted across the circle. Nicole, Shemaine, and Michelle stood radiantly in the light, their transformation astonishing. Justin focused on Nicole. "Oh, my." His face flushed. He patiently watched her scan the crowd. Nicole recognized him only by his eyes. They reached across the hall with a force that seemed to have mass. She had felt it before, though now it touched with added intensity. Her blood warmed, and she physically wanted him near. Shemaine clasped Nicole's little finger. "Would you look at them?" Nicole's eyes twinkled. "They sure clean up nice." Michelle giggled and stomped her foot. "What a difference!" She stood on the other side of Nicole and leaned forward to speak to Shemaine. "Do you see Griffin anywhere?" Before she could answer, Michelle spotted him as he waved from the other side of the hall. He immediately started walking toward her. Michelle spoke without taking her eyes off him. "Let's get over to Dad and Paul." The newly cleaned travelers greeted each other in a manner one might expect from people long separated. They hugged, kissed, laughed, and carried on, totally ignoring the people around them, who watched in amusement. Griffin arrived on the scene quickly, though he hesitated and watched the joy of the new arrivals. His smile broadened to equal theirs. Buciak pushed through the crowd and entered the small circle of people from the wilderness. "Are you really so close that a short separation has such a dramatic effect?" Nicole gave him a stunned look and smiled. "We've been running around in the middle of nowhere for so long that we started looking like it." She grabbed Justin's arm. "We're so pleased. Our blood is bubbling like champagne." Justin touched her gripping hand and looked at Buciak. "There's a feel of safety here. We've been rescued." Buciak angled his head to the left. "It would be more accurate to look at it as a semi-rescue." Nicole's eyebrows levitated. "Rain on our parade?" Justin smirked. "Half of a good thing is still a good thing." He turned back to Nicole. "Time for food and wine." Buciak stood silently as they walked to the nearest table. Paul and Shemaine followed. Michelle went to Griffin, and they talked quietly for a few moments, and then joined the others. The celebration continued late into the night, while the musicians played an assortment of dance music, mostly from the 40s. Nicole, though aching, could not resist moving to the tune of a few slow numbers. In the days that followed, the new arrivals blended into the community. With an ample supply of apartments to choose from, they situated themselves as they wished. Most apartments were near the west wall. The location caught the morning sun with warm, windless rays. At night, with all artificial light extinguished, the stars and the moon glittered through the huge circular entrance, illuminating the space in blue-black and gray. Paul and Shemaine acquired a place of their own. The small 3-room apartment, situated on the second floor of an adobe, had adequate furnishings, a few manufactured things from the past, and the rest homemade. Justin, Nicole, and Michelle obtained a larger place in the same area with similar accommodations. The community required 4 hours of their time for day-to-day chores. Free time could be filled by engaging in one of the many ongoing projects that functioned in the sciences or in the arts. To do this, they needed only to make themselves available to the appropriate people engaged in the project. Nicole and Shemaine spent their free time with the musicians and a small dance group. Justin, intrigued by the work of the sculptors, contributed to the production of a huge relief carving on the cavern wall and ended each afternoon covered with dust. Paul, forever the hunter and fisherman, found friendship with the hunters they had first met at the river. To his added delight, an engineer and a craftsman teamed up to produce a somewhat nimble and very useful device to replace his lost hand. Once again able to use a bow, the handicap of the missing limb lost much of its significance. Michel, to the surprise of all, involved herself with the scientists. At first she wandered from one group to another, functioning as a helper. Eventually she settled in with the biology group that studied the changing environment of the local area. It also gave her opportunities to make trips with Griffin when he went on a hunt. These were comfortable days, with adequate food, water, and genuine security, not to mention social life. Justin and Nicole acted as spokespersons for their respective families and spent considerable time giving detailed accounts of their exploits. Justin reported his buried supplies in Oregon and gave a description of the contents. Their recovery was classified as a worthwhile endeavor if the situation presented itself. And so it went, a seemingly new hold on pleasant living. Chapter 15. Fire and Ice. As the cave dwellers made optimistic adjustments to their lives, nature composed another crushing assault. This time it was fire and ice. Its duration was short, though catastrophic in nature, and came close to total elimination of the more complex life forms on the planet. The temperature's increase in the cavern's hot springs and the newly formed steam fissures were recognized by the community as harbingers of another calamity. Makeshift instruments recorded seismic rumblings emanating from deep within the earth. The falling rock and cascading dust within the cavern were both dangerous and annoying. On a clear sunny day, an observer seated atop the cavern cliff reported billowing smoke in the west that drifted to the north. An investigation quickly verified volcanic activity. The eruptions were small, numerous, and advancing to the east. This activity meant ash, and lots of it. With that in mind, the New Atlanteans developed a plan for securing the cavern entrance. The nearest wood stood 30 miles away at a higher altitude. In a Herculean effort, the needed timbers were stacked on wagons with crudely made wooden wheels and hauled by long lines of people. The approaching black cloud supplied the incentive for the laborious task. They tightly sealed the entrance, and the gaps were stuffed with hides and clay. A single large door permitted entry. The cavern dwellers were already in the survival mode, and the encasement was the only preparation that needed enactment. The boiling clouds and orange flames advanced upon New Atlantis. Warm winds from the south slowed the assault, and a gaseous cloud poised above the walls of New Atlantis allowed only the morning sun in the presence of the hovering blackness. Then 50 miles to the south, the earth split and gushed volcanic ash. The last of the sun, the morning sun, was smudged away. The only worldly light came from the glow of lava and the fires it started. The air swirled with particles of warm ash amid dying vegetation. Large and small creatures moved away. As hot gases ascended, cooler air rushed in, exploding firestorms that swirled like blazing tornadoes. Rooted trees lost leaf and limb to the sucking heat. Insects, birds, and all animals without a grip became momentary sparks in the whirling furnaces. Within the new sea, the water boiled, and a mountain grew. In the cavern, no flame entered, only the sound of the screaming wind, with a hellish shrill that caused pain to the ear invaded. With teeth of ash and sand, a monster gnawed at the cavern timbers. The fury was great, but the duration was short. With a final howl, the monstrosity bowed to a silence identified with the snows of winter. A muffling fluff, gray and warm, draped the irregular, and all appeared smooth. Hidden holes were instant graves to anything heavier than a fly. People ventured out only when disposing of the dead. The weeks languished. A lackluster sun dribbled photons. The light-loving humans cringed in the darkness of the cave where only tiny candles flickered. It became a place of touch and sudden fright when unexpected hands reached out. Below, the hot pools boiled excessively, issuing clouds of steam that crept to every nook and cranny, condensing in a constant dripping that drummed in the hollow of rock. Tiny drops collected in puddles that spilled into shallow rivulets, gurgling to the boiling below. With shaking hands, the inhabitants plugged their ears to the crescendo. None of the apartments were built with the concern of rain, and shelters had to be built within shelters. Without the cleansing light, a small scratch bloomed into a festering sore. Infections of the lungs lingered, incurable in the dampness. Coughing became the echoed music of the grotto. Time slowed in these ugly months, and the people strained for their sanity. When judgment was lost, physical bonding became the only solution. But many of the witless individuals found the door and dashed into the world of ash. The fortunate of these fell over the precipice to a sudden death. Beyond the cave, the sea heaved beneath the weight of powder too dry to sink. Near the shore, nature's filters clogged, the deep sea now the only refuge. This volcanic episode occurred at many points around the world. The vented heat of the earth warmed the atmosphere under a blanket of ash. A year-round summer extended to the earth's poles, and much of the captured water melted into the bulk of the seas. The waters bulged upon the land or dissipated into the warm atmosphere. The sky, energized with turbulence, lit with the light of electric flashes and boomed countless thunders into a continuous throb. An airborne cauldron of chemicals cooked a substance gritty in texture, greenish in color, and acid in content. The sterilizing liquid fell to earth and stripped the land of the soft and dissolvable. Life had to be well hidden to escape its sting. With the fury of volcanoes spent, the swelling of the earth's crust ceased. Newly opened vents produced a stability for pressure relief, and rains cleared the air of its particle content. The days of black skies transformed to pastel pink. For the living, it was not yet the light of life, but the light of hope. With the partial clearing of the sky, the inhabitants of the cave ventured from their sequestered place and found a barren land studded with the skeletons of plants. It was a place growing cold. Airborne particles still lingered and reflected much of the incoming warmth of the sun. The polar caps regrew quickly and sucked water from air, sea, and land. And, as speculated by the scientists, a tiny ice age commenced. The bitter cold was the final thinning of life. Many species vanished, and others were pushed into small pockets of refuge. The pitiful goons succumbed with the fire, and most of the dogs had their last howl in the frigid winds. The cavern dwellers, being prepared for the cold, endured the frigid temperatures in relative comfort. Around the planet small pockets of life persisted, as was the plan. From this point on, life would reclaim its previous domain. Life is tenacious. Death, its strengthening friend, returned as an occasional visitor. Chapter 16. Whispering Whale. The sun's brightness cloaks our days, blinding us to the universal vastness of spinning fireballs and multicolored marbles. But for that which is about our feet, it's a vision of clarity. Only in darkness can we see the truly distant. It is the time we call night. In one of those nights, the sailing craft, Christine, gathers a warm breeze and prowls across low swells, 2 humans astride her back. Nicole commanded the helm of the Christine. Justin stood at the bow, having completed a topside inspection. All was well. He moved aft to Nicole's side in preparation to relieve her at the helm. He put his right hand on her shoulder, gripped the helm with his left, and she stepped back. The man's palms tingled as he comprehended the craft's vigor. Broad swells heaved and abated soothingly, rhythmically. Justin designated a course and found harmony with the forces of the moment and place. Nicole sat on the cockpit bench. She rubbed her hands on her knees and smiled at Justin's silhouette, glowing with a moon-spun aura. "I wish the helm could be a place for 2. Nicole rose and climbed atop the forward cabin. Barefooted, she made her way to the bow. The wind flowed steadfast from the east. The Christine heeled to port. Nicole made a study of the trimming lines and sails. She was now their keeper. At the bow, the movement of the craft was exaggerated. Tiny splashes of water powdered her feet. She took a slow, deep breath and found the fragrance of land gone. She headed aft. At the main mast, Nicole leaned with the lean of the craft, her back to the pillar of wood. She slid to a sitting position, her face to the wind and a moon that showered the sea with ivory rays. With everything right, her only comment, a shallow sigh. Neither individual will sleep this night. The air was permeated with energy, an energy that made no demands, an energy that made itself available. In consumption of that energy, all things in this part of the sea, whether seen or unseen, touched the force, which produced a balance perceptible to all. One of the unseen swam not far astern of the Christine. This leviathan of the deep, this old one, showed crusty patches of raspy barnacles, crooked battle scars, and tattered flukes that stung with unhealed splits. Most serious was the weakness within the beast. His massive heart strained to push life-sustaining blood, relentless in its effort, though its last beat was not far off. The whale was cognizant that a rip and a quiver would occur, the flow of blood would cease, and death would come in a rush. However, he had a task yet to be done. He listened to the swirl of water at the Christine's stern, the sound he had followed on the long voyage from the north, waiting for the proper moment, a moment that must certainly be close. The whale calmly listened as the sound dwindled. The vessel moved away, its speed too swift for the old creature to sustain. His pace would be slower, constant, straight, and over the long haul he would keep up. The minds of the humans were discernible to the whale. He perceived their moods, comprehending their fear or joy, or hate, or love. He perceived the lesser moods as well, discomfort, boredom, delight, to name a few. His occasional mind intrusions, always apparent to the humans, were soft and misconstrued as functions of their imagination. This perceptibility was not exceptional to his species. It mirrored their highly evolved form of communication. Eons ago, when the ancestors of the whales made their re-entry into the sea, an extraordinary spark flashed through their intellect, a spark not unlike the one that engrossed the land-dwelling primates. The light grew to a great flame, though its use would be, by design, vastly different from that of the apes. The primates descended from the trees with manipulating fingers and the all-important grasping thumb to facilitate the investigation of their world. The animals' groping and stumbling eventually resulted in a technology that emphasized security of life and longevity. Their achievements were vast and even extended beyond the planet. In the case of the whale, the door to technology was entirely shut. Without the grasping appendages, physical investigation and manipulation of their environment was impossible. The water world, draped in shades of blue, had a sky that shimmered with changing geometric patterns and a blackness below that required audio perception. Without physical control, the whale's world became contemplative. Due to the creature's great size, physical survival was relatively uncomplicated and achieved without domination of its environment. Man, at odds with his environment, sought heat for his body and found fire. The whale sought warmth of the soul and found music. The consequences of these discoveries were of equal importance to both species, stepping stones toward their destinies. Thought transfer became the sea mammal's means of communication, where distance and physical objects were of no consequence. This capability allowed distribution of information instantaneously, if desired. This furnished the foundation of their society, transcendental in temperament and passionately adventurous. Whale intellect found expression through the powers of the mind. Only music and dance were demonstrated in a physical aspect. Their metaphysical science required artistic sensitivity, as symmetry and harmony were required for its understanding. The accumulated knowledge matched any human endeavor. However, transforming them into the concrete of the physical had no meaning in the whale society. The old whale that followed the sailing craft, a metaphysicist, excelled in the discipline of innovative orientations. His efforts were in the area of cosmological essence, a science comparable to man's theoretical physics, but differed with its spiritual inclusions. Using contemplative maneuvers, a skill of the mind and not a science, the physical requirements of his body, such as moving, feeding, and even the avoidance of danger, could be accomplished without the distraction to the intellect's escapade. The duration of the separation was a matter of talent, education, desire, and, of course, the physical functioning of the body. For the highly skilled, investigations into the universal vastness or the infinitesimal was possible. This whale that followed the Christine, a prodigy, found this type of advanced separation available to him. As a youth, his spirited character found expression more in physical exuberance and a love for adventure. He lacked maturity and meaningful depth in his contemplations. Therefore, adhering to tradition and the wisdom of elders, his first ethereal excursion, as many to come would be, was chaperoned. He and an elder, with synchronization, spirited between the earth and moon. There, the blue globe framed by the vastness of incomprehensible depth glowed in beauty. It was also a speck of water and dirt. Even smaller was the small of himself. From this justifiably humbling sight, the largest of the earthly creatures learned his fleshy place as an iota in the all that is. The most descriptive way to define the science that preoccupied the old one, and to state it as a whale might, required only one word: why. It was the base science from which all their science sprung, ancient in its genesis. Logic was fundamental to their understanding of the why, and required consideration of all forms of information, encompassing the physical, the emotional, the intuitive, and the transcendental. With non-intrusive probing of the mind by employing contemplative maneuvering and all-inclusive logic, the trained intellect avoided physical disruptions that could alter observations. Microscopically, achievements progressed to the study of matter at a level of absolute singularity and to the macroscopic of universal wholeness. This was possible due to the above-mentioned technique that transmuted the power of the mind into the dimension of the non-physical. Since the source of the physical was the non-physical, and ethereal realm, observations from this perspective were all-inclusive. These expeditions commenced with the ingestion of hallucinogenic deep-water algae. This alga, discovered in ancient times in the vicinity of thermal vents, and once a necessity for universal exploration, was now purely a shortcut. It isolated the mundane, prevented that intrusion, and triggered a rhythmic sensation of emotions that synchronized to the frequency of the force that bridged the two basic realms of the all that is. The mind trekked with requested orientation and sought the permissiveness of the powers that be. Our whale, by the time of midlife, achieved attunement to the perspectives of the origin of the physical, and determined that the unfurling of an additional dimension, there being 11 in total, was possible without catastrophic effects. From indicators seen beyond the material edge, emphatic agreement for predestined evolution of the whale species signified achievability. The powers that be provided the whale with a means to take a conscious step into its next evolvement. A universe composed of 5 dimensions manifested astride our actuality and would be imperceptible in present reality. The result of all of this was a method that allowed the transference of any mind to a specific microscopic singularity with the use of contemplative maneuvers. When the minds of the evolving were present, the unfurling of the 5th dimension could be enacted. This comprised the essence of the breakthrough. The age of the whale on Earth was at its end. The species, through the power of its evolved mind, was capable of taking its next step in evolution, a conscious step. The procedure discovered possessed true validity and permitted the formulation of a plan that allowed the entire whale species to enter the new realm en masse. It would occur at mid-ocean, in very deep waters, suitable to receive the bodies of the transcending beings. The transfer would take days. When the time came, it was under a new moon, and billions of stars dominated the sky. Our whale's spirit hovered near, but his body was to the north, in meditative repose. He would not go. He would be left alone. He had one more task. Here he would be only a witness. Many of the elders had made the transition, and now waited to receive the others. The procedure, well practiced and fine-tuned, was transmitted to all the whales and their whale-like cousins. Thousands and thousands of the creatures moved toward the chosen place in the sea. In preparation, all of their voices thundered a music that enraptured the water world. It was a song sung by all the leviathans of all the seas. The music drew them together. The music pushed to the bottom of the blue-black sea and echoed the happening to all the aquatic creatures. With that harmonic throbbing, the algae ascended. The Old One, bodiless, dove into the sea and positioned himself in a place he knew to be central in the unfolding episode. I alone, the joy be later. The algae, phosphorescent, spiraled in a massive column to the surface, opened like an umbrella, and twirled. A living ring of slow-moving giants touched the outer edge in gathering numbers. Their music pulsated in a cadence with accumulating intensity. Colors flashed in blues, purples, and golds. Soon the massive bodies began to plummet into the deep, like rain at an umbrella's fringe, swirling slowly, gathering momentum. The Old One trembled at the spectacle. He felt the joy. He felt the essence of those departing, and he twirled with them and sang their song. Thousands of whales added to the harmony, and the vortex achieved great speed. The old whale stayed for just the night, his accumulating loneliness much too stressful, the indescribable joy too tempting, but the beauty he would hold in his mind and take with him. The transcending whales in the meditative repose of the magic algae were guided through a labyrinth of mental images to the very essence of their minds. Their physical forms dropped into the vortex, and their minds streamed and proceeded with the guidance taught by the Old One. For days the procession continued, and the air hazed with the final breaths of the whales. The event peaked after 5 days and dwindled for another 6, as the last of the creatures drifted in a slowing circle of the abating maelstrom. In the end, all the whales departed their earthly home. All, except one. He would impart a gift for all humans, as decreed by the powers that be. The Christine cruised in the light of the morning sun, with Nicole at the helm. The day promised to be hot, and the sea, as if in anticipation of the heat, slowed its movement. The wind dwindled to a whisper. Its bulk sought another place, and only the diminishing chop of the sea was telltale of its bygone presence. The pressure of the helm light, Nicole's knee held the course, the craft more drifting than cruising. The fast-moving night, consumed by a joyful cruise, remained sleepless. Nicole's shoulders sagged, her fatigued muscles twinged, and her eyes swelled. She yawned deeply, and her dulled conscious mind allowed her tireless subconscious to play a tune. It was a soft song, barely audible even to herself. Her lips and tongue formed each lyric, though her breath was not sufficient to give the melody true birth. Her head swayed to the noiseless beat, and her eyes succumbed to sluggish blinks. The sun blazed to starboard, and Nicole felt the heat penetrate her skin. It sucked at the last vestige of her energy, and in defense she turned her face to port, to cool in the shadow of her head. Her trance-like gaze lingered on the watery sail shadow. The non-reflecting shade comforted her hot eyes. With this peace, mild hallucinations swirled. The Christine's slackened speed allowed the whale to catch up during the early morning, and he lingered beneath her bulk in a pensive state, his body almost catatonic. Nicole's lethargic mind seeped into his and startled him into alertness. The moment. However, the impulsive interpretation was wrong. His body popped to the surface and shattered the sea, exactly in line with Nicole's gaze. The whale's breathing valve opened, emitting an eruption of gas, moisture, and steam, and his bulk tossed a wave at the side of the Christine. The craft heeled sharply to starboard. The movement flung Nicole's body across the cockpit, and she bounced once on her rump. With bulging eyes, she stared through the descending spray of whale breath, and a rainbow framed the afterdeck. Nicole heard the short, powerful sucking sound of the whale's sniff. The Leviathan, realizing his mistake, descended quickly to depth. The craft rolled back to port, and then to starboard with decreasing violence. The boom swung ungracefully with the lurching of the craft. Below, the great whale, his heart pounding, quaked in pain. His colossal cry boomed and trembled the Christine. More heart tissue tore, but the torture slowly abated, and the whale quelled his huge body. He hovered at middle depth. Equilibrium established, he mentally examined the failing pump. The massive muscles contracted in unison, but quivered between beats. He had little time left. Nicole, shaken by the sudden appearance of the whale, sat where she landed, in the aft starboard corner of the cockpit. She made no effort to get up. Her mind reeled from some sort of mental punch. Confused images unfurled, and she heard something voice-like. The abstraction dissipated, and she snatched at a fleeting insight. But its flight was too fast. The last of the breath spray settled, and the rainbow vanished with the pulse of a mystical thought. Nicole rose to her feet and scrutinized the foamy sea to port, utterly bewildered. Prior to the whale's arrival, Justin, below decks, occupied himself with the preparation of the morning meal. Within the cooking stove a small blaze crackled. Justin sat at the galley table, lethargically watching the flame through the open door. His head nodded to the drowsy haze of his mind, and he periodically succumbed to true sleep, only to momentarily awake with a start. He took a deep breath, determined to stay alert. He moved to the stove and studied its structure. A relic from a farmhouse back in Oregon, homemade, it had charm and craftsmanship good enough for the maker to sign his initials with a welding rod. The double letters of F and Z were durably scorched in the upper left-hand corner. Justin decided to fetch another piece of wood. With a languid gait, he headed for the fuel stored to starboard. Even before he got there, he saw the stick he wanted. Precisely the right size, it lay loose at the base of the woodpile. He bent to retrieve it. At that precise moment the whale surfaced to port. The craft lurched to starboard in the direction of Justin's momentum, and launched his relaxed body into a forward flip. His vision whirled, and in an instant his weight shifted from pressure on his feet to pressure on his shoulders and upper neck. His legs and half his back came to rest against the woodpile. The rest of him lay flat on deck. The Christine lurched back to port. Justin gagged, his chin driven into his chest, and the air squeezed from his lungs. He grimaced and pushed hard with his feet against the firewood in a calculated move to allow his feet to pass over his head, conduct a back roll, and leave him perched on his hands and knees. However, the boat shifted back to starboard, and his position remained the same. He relaxed in defeat, and a thunderous sound vibrated the deck beneath him. Justin lay there in mild panic, waiting for the craft to find equilibrium. Crap! I hope we didn't hit a reef. Again he tried to push off with his feet, but his hair, stuck under his back, pulled when he tried to slide across the deck. Nicole burst into the cabin. "Justin!" She spotted him lying on the deck and knelt behind his head, looking directly at him. Water dripped from her hair into his face. "What are you doing?" Justin grimaced. "My new meditative position. Is everything okay topside?" Nicole smirked. "It doesn't look very comfortable." "Yeah, everything's okay." She put her hands on both sides of his head. "Did you bump your head? You won't believe what happened topside." Justin brushed water from his face. "Please, Nicole, move out of my way so that I can get up." Nicole obliged, and he pushed on the woodpile with his feet, did a back roll, and stood. He looked at Nicole. "I bet you never saw your face upside down." He ambled to the table, rubbing the back of his neck, and sat down. Nicole followed. "This whale popped up, right under my nose." Justin's eyes widened. "Under your nose?" Nicole poked him in the shoulder. "Listen." She crunched her eyebrows. "Something special happened. There was a rainbow, and I heard something." Justin looked at her. "I take it that the whale rolled the boat?" Nicole put her hands on her hips. "Well, what else? But that's not important." She clasped her hands. No, I mean the whale is important." She looked into Justin's eyes. A few silent moments went by. "It was special. There was something there. An insight. Oh, you know what I mean." She looked at him questionably. "Don't you?" Justin caught the urgency in her voice. "Perhaps a playful whale on a slow day?" He paused. "I heard what sounded like thunder, and the deck quivered." "Yeah, I heard that too." She sat down at the table, talking in a whisper. "Something extraordinary happened up there. Dreamlike. Eerie. Yeah, that's it. Eerie." She paused. "No, that's not it either." She leaned back. "Maybe the whale hit the boat." Justin put his elbow on the table and gripped his chin with his thumb and forefinger. "Why are you whispering?" She looked into his eyes. A moment of the whale episode flashed at the question. Whispering? Her eyes brightened. That was it. I heard a whispering. She hesitated, her mouth still smiling. But I don't remember what. Justin waited a moment as she thought. Then he spoke. I remember the first time I saw the Christine. I knew it would be part of our lives. Was it like that? Nicole spoke in her normal voice. No. She got to her feet. No, not destiny. She ran the fingers of both her hands through her hair. She looked into Justin's eyes. She saw him striving to understand. I'm sure it was a good thing, whatever it was. She grabbed Justin's right hand and pulled him to his feet. Go topside. I'll cook. He gave her a kiss on the cheek and climbed the ladder. I'll look for the whale. No, it withdrew. Justin turned on the ladder to face her. It withdrew? Nicole shook her head. I don't know why I said that. Go catch a fish or something. I have to clear my head. Justin mumbled and stepped topside. He looked about. With the wind totally abated, the Christine sat quietly on a smooth sea. He turned a full circle, scanning for the whale. There were no signs of the creature. None. The mainsail hung as if exhausted, and Justin made the boom fast in a midship position. He proceeded forward and hauled the main down. He did the same with the jibs, and made a meticulous inspection as he returned to the cockpit. From the small pipe protruding from the galley, smoke issued in a gathering cloud that seemed to cling to the main mast and climb its height. Burning wood. It's out of place at sea. He yelled down to Nicole. The smell of fire belongs in the forest. We should eat our fish raw. There was no answer. Justin looked to the west in the direction of the nearest land. It lay beyond the horizon. He stuck his head through the galley hatch. We'll be able to sleep together, as calm as it is. Below, Nicole proceeded to prepare a meal of poached fish, instant mashed potatoes, and fruit. The potatoes were part of the recovered supplies from Oregon. The stove, nearly ready for cooking, and the heat discomforting for Nicole, she removed her thin leather vest and draped it across the woodpile. The vest was her favorite garment, and a gift from Chemaine. Chemaine made it for her prior to her departure for Oregon. Nicole moaned with homesickness, but smiled a moment later, realizing the trip was almost complete. Her body glistened in the heat of the cabin. She leaned her butt against the edge of the table, her arms supporting her upper body. A pan of water heated. Nicole looked down at her naked torso, her stomach hard and flat, her breasts firm. Physically, she was in excellent shape, a product of the rugged lifestyle and good food. Justin ducked his head into the galley and saw Nicole's nakedness. He jokingly raised his eyebrows. Nicole smiled with the thought of chucking the meal overboard and finding rest in the arms of her lover. However, her empty stomach disagreed, and she waved Justin topside. Later, love. Later. Justin pulled his head up from the heat of the cabin. A full meal will put me to sleep. Nicole leisurely wiped a few globules of sweat from her stomach. Pregnancy had never been an issue. Justin had the proper operation years ago. Nicole recalled the young Indian girl, Awa. The last baby I've seen. She bowed her head. Their bones surely dragged off, powder in the wind. The water on the stove bubbled. The noise jogged her sleepy mind. Why did I volunteer for this? She took the battered aluminum pot from the stove, poured a bit of hot liquid into a frying pan, and placed it on the stove. On the table lay some fish fillets that Justin prepared. She gently placed them in the pan, covered them, and turned to prepare the potatoes. From 2 packets she dumped the white powder into the remaining hot water. With a wooden homemade spoon she stirred the substance. A rivulet of sweat ran down her neck and across the mound of her jostling breast. Unnoticed, it proceeded to the nipple and cascaded into the potatoes. Nicole saw the droplets just as they hit the potatoes. She mumbled something about salt and continued the mixing. Presently, satisfied with the consistency of the mixture, she put it aside. Next, finding 2 peach-like globes, she sliced them into wedges. On a metal plate, Nicole tried to arrange the slices into an attractive pattern. The wedges did not comply. Bullshit. And she pushed them into a jumbled mound. From the table she retrieved the potatoes and scooped large portions onto the 2 plates. When finished, she grabbed her vest, slipped it on, and headed topside for a breath of cooler air. Justin worked near the main mast. Nicole watched in silence. He wore only leather shorts. Strong muscles rippled beneath the brown skin of his back. Bleached body hair gave him a golden hue. His long hair, tied in a simple knot at his shoulders, descended to the middle of his back. Nicole laced the front of her vest with a piece of rawhide as she eyed Justin's back. It was often the object of her foreplay, and the remembrance titillated her mood. Nicole mused, "He is so right for me." She loved to lean on his powerful character and fathomless endurance, or bathe in his tenderness. Interestingly, he had many moods. His humor had spontaneity and often caught her unprepared, and much of it was humorous to him alone. Then there were other times, those special times, times of imaginative temperament. Nicole could always see them coming. They were her favorite moods. Like a kitten finding the warm sun and awaiting a gentle stroke, she would comply to his touch, pleasantly aware of the mutual joy. Justin's large blue eyes would soften, and a mellow thought would flow from between his lips, and then another, and another. Nicole, ever confident of his sincerity, utterly relaxed in the romance. Erotic whimsy gushed through her mind with expectations of sensations. Justin's eyes would twinkle, and Nicole willingly sank with him into the sensual adventure. Nicole and Justin were perfect companions, and their enjoyment with each other totally genuine. At these special times of love-making, Nicole's initial passiveness proceeded to womanly aggressiveness, taking the lead with a power and an energy precocious to her gender. Their souls and bodies thus intertwined produced moments that later neither of them spoke of. Always they emerged from these salacious pools, graced with mutual insight. Nicole finished tying her vest, and Justin completed his chore. He turned. Upon seeing Nicole, he spontaneously launched into a true account as to what happened to him below decks when the whale surfaced. Nicole was soon laughing hysterically. Justin continued to explain about the episode as he jumped into the cockpit. Nicole, still laughing, went below to fetch the meal. In a twinkle she returned with 2 plates of food and handed one to Justin. Justin dipped his fingers into a bucket of sea-water and sprinkled his fish. They were hungry, and neither spoke during the meal. Justin, the first to finish, leaned back on the bench. "A full stomach is an effective tranquilizer." Promptly he sank into drowsiness, and was nearly asleep when Nicole adjusted her sitting position, disrupting the stability of the boat. The movement awakened him. He spoke with a drowsy mind. "What I want now is our soft bunk, your back against my chest, and empty blackness." A tiny strand of hair on the man's head stirred with a feeble whisper of wind that produced Lilliputian ripples on the oil-smooth sea. Nicole finished the last morsel of her meal. With tired eyes she scanned the sea for signs of the whale. There were none. She turned to Justin and extended her hand toward his plate. "The whale is near. I know the touch." Lethargically, Justin stared, and after a moment he handed her the plate. Nicole put one plate on top of the other, and with the flick of her wrist flung them through the open galley hatch. The rattle of the plates, clamorous in the silence of the becalmed sea, caused the couple to gawk at the galley, mesmerized. Finally, Justin rose, breaking the spell. "Come, my sweet, to oblivion bliss." Nicole pulled the cord of her vest. "I will sail that cabin sea with thee." As they slept, the Christine moved not across the water, but through the air in the grip of a river that snaked the sea, a river of vastness equal to any that flowed on land. About the hull, small bits of flotsam bobbed. Some clung to the craft with strange magnetism. Beneath the still waters and the floating debris, near the bottom of the river, a whale hovered. The old whale, in deep meditation, his bodily functions slowed, his heart moved more with a rumble than a beat. Moving, yet not moving, the massive creature, the sailing craft, the humans, and the tiny bits of debris made use of the river in the sea. The exhausted humans lulled in the comfort of dreams, dreams joyful like fairies and children, and awesome with their truth. The day progressed to early evening, and a gentle breeze puffed the sea to ripples. The ripples grew to chop, and the sailing craft wobbled on her round bottom. The gentle sway jostled Justin to consciousness. His eyes opened and gathered the light of the blue-gray sky. He rolled to face Nicole, asleep on her back. Justin closed his eyes and oozed his presence around her, contemplating her name more as a song. Nicole moistened her lips and shifted her bottom seductively. Justin felt her movement and smiled. He never told Nicole of this fun, and he wondered why. He planted a short, sucking kiss on her shoulder. Justin spun away and rose to a sitting position at the edge of the bunk. Nicole opened her sleepy eyes and blinked. She reached for Justin's hair, but he leaned forward, and her hand slid down his back as he rose to his feet. Her hand dropped and dangled over the edge of the bunk. Justin spoke abruptly. "I'm going topside to hoist the sail and get under way." Nicole's eyes followed Justin, and she smiled. The smile became a sneer. "Justin, you are a terrible shit, and I hate every molecule of your body." Justin spun around. "Oh, I've known that for quite some time. It's not love. It's my money you're after." "I spit on you." She mocked the gesture. "And it is your money, and I will have it. Your addiction to my body and the way I move in bed makes you my slave and lackey." She spat. "I hate lackeys." Almost immediately she added, "Justin, I'm not really in the mood for this. Please?" Justin smiled broadly. "How am I going to make it in show business without practice?" He pulled on his shorts and headed topside, but abruptly turned back to her. "Spit on me, will you? There will be no sex for you until further notice. You can check the bulletin board for any change in this policy." Nicole forced a reply. "Oh, please, not that." Topside the wind blew at a growing sea. The Christine lurched in and out of small troughs, catching the breeze to starboard. Justin took a deep breath, stretched a time or two, and moved to the bow. He was a seaman, but not a trained or accomplished sailor. Most of what he did on the Christine was improvised. He hoisted the jib and returned to the cockpit. There he pulled the jib line taut, and the craft gained headway. He turned her into the wind, and the jib luffed in the breeze now coming over the bow. Justin quickly moved forward and hoisted the mainsail. In short order, the Christine moved along smartly. Nicole felt the lean of the craft, and she came topside to compliment him on his efficiency. "Not bad, my lover, not bad." Justin smiled. "The success of this maneuver has put me in a good mood. I have decided to allow you sex this day. A sort of amnesty." Nicole's eyes widened. "Oh, goody!" And she disappeared into the galley. Justin tied off the helm and moved to the lee of the boat. His left hand found a mainstay for balance, and the low safety rail supplied a brace for his knees. With his right hand he untied the cinch about his waist and prepared to urinate. Justin stared at the sea moving past, and he scrutinized the yellow spattering the blue. Nicole took 2 steps up the ladder and spotted Justin's bare bottom and awkward position. Quietly she climbed topside, stepped close to his back, and gave his shoulder a sharp thump. Justin's urine stopped flowing, and his left hand rotated on the cable. His knees pained from the pressure to hold his position, and his right arm reached back to find a grip on something. With nothing there, he hollered, "Nicole!" Nicole grabbed his flailing arm and pulled him back. Justin, wide-eyed, shook his left hand to dissipate the burning sensation, and his shorts slipped below his exceedingly red knees. Nicole backed away, her face dominated by a smile of satisfaction. "Remember the telephone?" Justin's grimace popped to a smile, and then to laughter. He hoisted his shorts and returned to the helm. "You can have all my money." Nicole moved behind him, strapped her arms around his chest, and whispered in his ear, "How much farther do we have to go?" "Well, we've moved past that foot-like projection of Mexico, which puts us into the Gulf. From here it'll soon be no more than a sail across Texas. I'd say something like 2 weeks." Nicole again spoke into his ear. "We've been gone so long. I wonder about the kids and what they're doing." "Probably making babies." A moment of silence followed. "Justin, I've forgotten what it's like to hold a baby, what it feels like, what it sounds like." Their minds drifted into the past, the birth of their children, another man, another woman, another genuine love. Justin pointed to the horizon. "If we could see over that mound of water, the settlement would be just about there." Nicole gave him a short squeeze. "I bet there's more than just the cave. I bet some of the families have moved out. I bet there are little houses here and there with gardens of vegetables." Justin moved the helm to starboard and caught a bigger chunk of the wind. Nicole released her grip. For the next 2 days they held the craft hard to the wind, driving the Christine on tirelessly, seeking every measure of speed. They took turns at the helm, while the other, when needed, tended the sails. They slept at will, but never together. The food, kept simple, was mostly cold, but neither complained. At the start of the 3rd day, the wind shifted to blow from the stern, and the speed of the Christine slowed. The craft settled and the helm steadied, with little of the wind's force felt by the humans. Nicole, at the helm, hollered, "Topside, please." Justin stuck his head through the hatch of their berthing compartment. "You called?" She looked to the west. "Let's head for land. Our food supply is getting low and soft." She turned to him. "I need a rest and a bath." Justin nodded. "Sounds good to me. Perhaps we can find some meat." Nicole eased the helm to port. Justin came topside and trimmed the sails on the established starboard tack. By day's end they dropped anchor in a small protected bay. Ashore, low rolling hills with bushy vegetation and the jungle absent indicated their movement northward. Justin sniffed the wind. "This looks like good hunting." Nicole climbed atop the forward cabin. "I don't see any sign of fresh water." Justin rubbed his hands together. "We got plenty of water. A bird or a rabbit is what we need." He scanned the shore. "There's not going to be much in the line of fruit." After a short discussion, they brought the Christine closer to land and deployed 2 anchors. At the completion of the chore, the couple went below decks for a full night's sleep, the hunt being scheduled for morning.